So, hey everyone, and welcome to this blab. And this blab particularly is about, do you know how to podcast? And on the blab today, I have two very special guests, and very special to my heart. I have Natalie Cutler Welsh. She is a podcaster and has finished her 100th podcast officially, and is now moving to the blab platform. And is currently doing a weekly blab just like I do. And then we have Paul Spain, and Paul is the founder of the Asia Pacific Podcast Conference, which is going to be happening here in New Zealand in February. So if you really want to know about podcasting and you want to fly over from any of the countries to New Zealand, come and join us. And if you're in New Zealand, come and join us. But I'm going to let I'm Juanita Faree, generally known as Juanita Z, and I run the Online Business Academy, and we do anything to do with online learning. So anything in terms of blab, social media platforms, digital marketing, content marketing, just come over there and come and see what we do. But I'm going to let these two amazing people tell you a little bit more about themselves. So, Paul, do you want to start?
Sure, absolutely. Well, I've been involved in the digital media space, I guess, for a long time, since before it was really known as digital media. Technology involved in getting things to print in the early days. And then 2002, I was involved in launching a social network that we grew to about 300,000 members around the world. That was pre-Facebook, so it was reasonably early days. And these days with Global Voice Media, I've been involved in podcasting for about 5 years or so. We launched the New Zealand Tech podcast going back early 2011, and we topped iTunes, #1 on iTunes here with that on our 3rd episode. So since then, been growing a podcasting network. Very interested in podcasting, really in regional areas and in niches. So if we look at Asia Pacific region, New Zealand, Australia, and across Asia, one of the things that I've noticed, and I think a lot of others have too, is that podcasts are mostly being listened to US. That's US content that's being listened to in these regions.
Right.
So I'm very keen in helping people get involved that are maybe a little bit more local. So that's a really big focus for me. And with the Asia Pacific Podcast Conference, that's really one of the focuses there. But we're really quite broad. So we've got people from the broadcast industry, radio and TV, that are attending and speaking. Podcasters, blabbers, and the like. So it's going to be quite an interesting event. And we have Cliff Ravenscraft coming down from the US as our keynote speaker, and he was really the speaker that stood out for me the most when I was in the US a few months ago for the Podcast Movement Conference.
Wow.
Does that sort of cover the bases?
I think it does, and I think we're kind of blessed to have you on this blab, and also to have Cliff coming through to New Zealand and being able to join as a keynote speaker for that podcast conference.
Yeah, we were quite pleased. He had said that he wasn't expecting to be squeezing in any more conferences into his agenda for 2016.
Wow.
And, but after he got the invite, he was swayed by the fact that it was in New Zealand, and he's always wanted to visit. So we're very fortunate that he's opened up some time in his calendar to come to the conference, and also to spend a bit of time traveling around New Zealand. And, we may, I think he's sort of opening that up as well to any of the attendees that are maybe interested in spending a little bit of time with him after the conference, as he trips around the country a little bit to maybe come on some of those travels.
That is absolutely fantastic. So great to have both of you, on here. Nats, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, can you guys hear me?
Yes, perfectly. Thank you.
Okay, cool. Sorry, I don't know why it's just not working on the laptop today. That's okay. I'll just have a shaky hand. That's okay. I'm on the phone.
Sometimes.
I'm on the phone. I'm in transit. I'm on the way back. I'm still in Tauranga, so I'm on the way back home to Auckland, but I'm still visiting with my sister. Yeah, so for those people that don't know me, my business, and I am called The Go-To Girl. So it's Go-To Girl Social Media and Networking. And I work primarily with women entrepreneurs, and I connect them and I coach them so that they can have more fun and flow in their business. And that's what I love to do. It's been going about 3.5 years. Yes, I just did episode number 100 on my Go-To Girl podcast. And previously I did 125. And that was co-hosted, though, with my co-author, Jackie, for our podcast called If Only They'd Told Me. That is our parenting podcast. So that, that's a lot of time talking in the microphone.
It's a huge amount of time. That's great.
It is a huge, and both of you are so experienced in it. And I just want to acknowledge people that have joined this blab at the moment, because I am looking at their profiles, and a few of them are also pretty experienced podcasters. So if you guys want to jump on and share some of your experiences, please feel free. There is an open seat. Just jump on and share. Now, let's say somebody is starting out in podcasting. What would be if I was, say, wanting to do a proper podcast? I think let's first define what podcasting is. So in your opinion, what is podcasting?
Oh, you take it away, Paul.
Oh, okay, thanks. Well, like anything in this modern world, there are probably quite a number of definitions, and we've even got different terms. So there's already been, over a number of years, some debate in terms of should we be using the term podcasting at all? Is that the right term? But for most people that listen to podcasts, they're listening to pre-recorded audio, and they'll be listening to it played back through a podcast player or podcatcher, as they're sometimes called. The most popular of those being from Apple with their Podcasts app on their iPhone, and then a whole range of podcasting playback apps on Android, and there's also iTunes as well, where people pull down their podcasts. So to define it in its entirety is probably a little bit, it's a bit broader. There are video podcasts, and certainly Blab fits into that field, as well as, there being other ways of describing Blab. But the most common and the most popular listening of podcasts at the moment seems to be through devices that way. And then we've got new channels that are starting to come through that where people aren't listening to podcasts they've downloaded in advance, and they're using apps that will bring them podcasts on demand. But for many, it's similar to radio, but it's that audio on demand, in the same way that Netflix is video on demand. And that's part of why it's accelerating, as we see more people consuming video, what they want, when they want it. We're seeing the same with audio and with podcasts. Natalie, over to you.
Woo, nice answer. Can you guys hear me? Because I don't know where my microphone is in relation to my scarf, but am I good?
Yes.
You're good.
Okay. If it's rustling around, let me know and I can take it off. So when we first started and we'd say, oh, we're doing a podcast, and people would say, like, what is that? We would say it's online. It's like an online radio show. So we said, it's a weekly show that we're doing, talking about the topic of parenting or the topic of business, if I was doing Go-To Girl. And every week we have, either a guest, sorry, but I got to hit the camera, either a guest or, so we kind of did, for a Go-To Girl, I did 1 in 5. So 1 in 5 basically would be a monologue. It would be me just talking. Mm-hmm. And today we can talk about, the joys and the challenges of doing a solo episode. And also then the other 4 would be interviews. So I'd go 4 interviews, 1 monologue, 4 interviews, 1 monologue, pretty much, give or take. And ideally people do, put their podcast out the same day each week, and they've got great consistency, because we know consistency is key. I think I manage that most of the time, but not all of the time. And sometimes I had a whole bunch in the bank. Like when I went to Social Media Marketing World last year in America, I had about 6 in the bank ahead of time, so that I was like super organized. And other times I would be recording, a couple of days before I'd go live. But one thing I always do is I always, rightly or wrongly, because it makes it harder to do it, but I would always do my intro and my outro in real time, right? So even after I recorded a podcast and I interviewed somebody 3 weeks ago or 3 months ago, I would always do my intro and my outro in real time. And that way I could be talking about things that were really happening in my life and business, and I could make comments around that. So I really like doing that, even though it definitely makes it harder work because you have to go back and find where you saved the episode and string it all together. But I do have a podcast editor who did my editing for me, thank goodness. So that made things easier.
Excellent. And you obviously recommend a podcast editor. So
well, initially it was my husband, but yeah, now it's a professional in Sri Lanka.
Oh, excellent. So you do outsource it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Paul, just coming back to you a little bit, tell us if again, so we're just starting in, how do you know how to podcast and things like that? So tell us a little bit from your perspective. If somebody was starting out, where would you tell them to start? What would you tell them to do?
Well, there are a lot of online resources that are great to look at in terms of those guidance. But I guess if you sort of step back, it's a reasonably simple thing to do. Right now what we're doing is we've just got our microphones plugged into either a smartphone or a computer, and we're doing a live broadcast. Recording a traditional podcast is reasonably similar to that. You can be as simple as one microphone plugged into a computer. In our case, then we use some mixing equipment that we've got here in the studio. I don't know if we can quite get the right angle down there. You can see the mixer there. And so, we record a lot of podcasts in the Podcast New Zealand studio. So we're set up with a bit more of a formal structure, but these things can happen over Skype and so on. So the bits and pieces to pull it all together aren't that complicated. What I think is key is really finding something that you're really passionate about, that you're knowledgeable about, and something that you could basically commit that time to putting something together each week on. And if you're willing and able to do that, that's probably the most important part of it. The other bits and pieces, like the equipment and how you do it, those can all be found out through the varying online resources. And just as you start stepping into it, you'll find those things reasonably easy to pull together.
Absolutely. So what I'm hearing from both you and Natalie, as you're talking, it is about taking that step back and having a look at that big picture first, and really understand what it is that you want to podcast about, why you want to podcast, what is the benefit of it, what is it going to do for you and your business, and what do you want to achieve out of it? Am I hearing that correctly?
Yeah, spot on.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, when I coach people, I always go back to the golden question, like what is your goal? And when you're starting a podcast, it's so important because I always tell people, you know what? For me, at least 3 hours per episode, right? Yeah. So it's a lot of time. If you do the math on that, 100 episodes, it's a lot of time. So you need to know your goal. You need to know what you're wanting to achieve. And I love acronyms and things. And I've got there's 4 P's, right? Profile or positioning. Something you're passionate about, like Paul mentioned, and also the people, because you're not really doing it for the money, obviously, because it's free on iTunes. And so you really want to think about who are your people specifically. And just like running a business, you don't want to cater to everyone and talk about everything. You want to really know your niche and know what you truly love talking about. So 4 years ago, when I started my If Only They Told Me podcast, I love talking about kids and parenting and anything related to that. It was got me so excited. And Jackie and I, we're pretty funny together. I'm Canadian and I'm very candid and open, and she's British and very proper. And we just bounced off each other and we just had so much fun. But then it got to the point where I was like, you know what? I'd rather just hang out with my kids than talk about my kids all the time. And so for me, the passion, it hadn't died, but it had faded. And my life journey had taken me into working more with women, and I'd started Go To Girl. And so for a while, probably for a year, I was doing 2 podcasts weekly, never missing a week. Seriously, that's a lot of work. Pat on the back.
It is a lot of work.
And then I got to the point where I was like, I'm just going to put If Only They Told Me to bed, because I was done. And my motto is if you're not having fun and if something's too much work, it's probably time to either tweak things or move on. And so I moved on from that. And that's kind of the point I got to with the Go To Girl podcast, which I love so much. But it's a lot of work, especially when you're hashtag juggling the mother load of raising a family while running a business. And so I decided I'm actually going to transition into Blab. I still love shining the light on people. I still love giving my opinion, having discussions, but I'm just not going to have all the editing and the show notes and everything that goes with podcasting. Just going to do a Blab, put it out there, upload it to YouTube, all good.
Excellent. Well, it does sound like it sounds like you've been on quite a journey, Natalie. So you've gone from one thing and then you've moved on to something else. And it almost sounds like you started out and you've been experimenting, looking at what works for your business, what doesn't, got really into it. And now you've moved and you've transitioned on to Blab. And I'm really happy to have introduced you to Blab. Which is absolutely fabulous, still in beta phase, which is really fantastic. I've got a question from the audience, and I'd love one of you to answer this. I have my opinion on it, but it'd be great for you to answer it. Is, do you use a microphone or do you use your webcam microphone when you're blabbing?
You can probably see the answer in my case. But I think it varies according to the situation where you are in terms of what equipment's available. But I would generally suggest with Blab and with any sort of podcast, if you use a more professional microphone than just what is built into your laptop or your computer, you'll usually get a benefit.
So I'll just share with you. I'll share with you. This is the one that I use. It's really, really cool. And it definitely does, it's quite a nice little one to stick onto your laptop and it picks up pretty well. So that's a Samsung. I don't know if Nats, you don't have yours at the moment because you're in Tauranga and you're kind of working.
Yeah, I'm just in transit. That's right. But normally, definitely, I use my microphone. I've got a really big yellow microphone. One of the things I'm going to do actually is get an Amazon affiliate link to like the Blue Yeti mic, which everyone seems to love, put that on my website. But you can tell the difference in sound between Paul and Juanita is very significant, partly because I think your room you're not in the kitchen, which is good, but it's quite echoey. Paul's in a not a booth, but more of a contained room. And if I was at home in my podcast studio, you would notice that the sound was so much clearer and it really feels like I'm there in the room with you. It makes a huge difference. I know there's some great Kiwis who have been launching podcasts lately. My lovely friend, Catherine Newton, Natalie Sisson has a podcast. Joe and Janine from Get It Done Mom recently launched theirs. And, and the difference in sound quality, sometimes like I had a friendly word to Catherine at one point going like, you are so magic on the microphone, but you need a better microphone, honey, because it's just not doing you justice. Because if you've got good content, but you've got a crap microphone, it's just not good. It's just not as nice an experience. And as a podcast listener, I learn through audio. I love going for podcast power walks and I listen to tons of podcasts. And if you don't have good audio, people are they're not going to come back. That's my view.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that seems to be common feedback, doesn't it?
Can I just
tune out?
Can I just check with you? Does this sound better?
It's all right. It's a bit echoey. I think it's your room though, not your mic. I'm not sure. You just need some blankets draped around the place or something to absorb the sound.
It's absorbing the sound. Okay, great. I just wanted to know because DV Safety Now. You're telling me I'm too far away from the microphone. Shouldn't be. I should be fine on the microphone. The microphone picks up pretty well. So yeah. Maybe it's not.
It's loud. It's loud, but it's a little bit echoey. It's fine. It's not horrible.
Yeah, I will do. Thank you. I will do.
Get yourself a Blue Yeti on my affiliate link when I get it set up.
Will do. Okay, so coming back to so thank you very much. That's a great question. Thank you very, very much for that. So having a look, Paul, tell us a little bit about, I know you very briefly when you started told us about your journey and you just covered it very briefly, but in terms of podcasting, tell us about your journey from podcasting. What made you decide to get into it? How did you get into it and what did you do? Like, what are the podcasts that you've run from here on out?
Yeah, sure. Well, in early 2011, might have even been late 2010, I met one of the guys from Microsoft New Zealand here, and he asked me the question. He said, would you be interested in doing a podcast? And interestingly, it had been something on my mind, but I had no idea really how to get started. I didn't have anybody to podcast with. So as soon as that question came, I was like, yes, let's jump on, let's get involved, let's put a podcast together. And so we recorded an episode, and that one ended up in the bin. We didn't end up using it. And then maybe, I don't know, a few weeks later, we recorded a second one, and that was okay. So we put that one online. And then I tried to get hold of him to record another episode. I thought, yeah, it's been about 2 weeks. We really need to get another episode online. Couldn't get hold of him. So there's me scratching my head thinking, oh, what a flake. Why is he not returning my calls? And this isn't going to work out very well. So I got hold of another friend who happened to work in a radio station and said, hey, look, I can't get hold of Brad. And, I think we should get another episode of this podcast out. This is kind of fun. I enjoy doing it. And, we've got started. So, would you be available? And he said, yes, of course. And, in fact, he said, look, you can come and record in the radio studio if you like. So we did that. And soon after that one episode went out, I heard back from Brad. Turned out his wife had surprised him with a trip to the islands for a bit of a holiday, and he didn't know about it. So we kept going while he was on the surprise trip away, and when he got back, he joined me and Skip in the radio studio, and we started recording there. And we recorded over 100 episodes of the New Zealand Tech Podcast from the radio studio.
Awesome.
That was a lot of fun. And what I really enjoyed about that experience was I was getting together with friends on a weekly basis and just chatting about something that we enjoyed chatting about. And of course, podcasts open up all sorts of opportunities. So we had people contacting us with the new tech products and so on to review. We had technology companies wanting their people to come on the podcast. So, really it was a whole lot of fun. And ultimately they ended up leaving the podcast and doing their own thing. But that provided a platform then to start launching other podcasts. So we got into a business podcast, entertainment podcast. And we really realized there was an opportunity because we had such a big audience of podcast listeners here to build that into a podcast network. And so our most recent podcast that we launched, which is called My Kiwi Life, we launched that one probably about 10 weeks ago. That one we were able to get into the top 10 on iTunes straight off its first episode, I think within 2 or 3 days of launching. So that for us was a bit of proof that when we get good content and the right people, then using the network that we can really reach out and get to a big audience quite quickly. And so that one's continued to grow, and it's been in the podcast charts here in New Zealand pretty much continuously ever since launching. So
Wow.
really pleased around that. And of course now we're starting to look for other podcasters who maybe already have podcasts and would want to join the network, or people that are ready to launch a podcast. And so that's what we're working on.
Paul, I've got a client. I've got one for you, Paul.
Oh, great. That's good.
Yeah, I'll hook you up.
And we're looking not just locally. There's some international, content that we will release with, I think a global interest, and some that are more on the sort of local or regional basis, sort of Australia, Singapore, Hong Kong, and so on. So there's a lot of excitement there, and I think there are lots of different audiences where podcasting is now relevant. I've done quite a bit of work. The radio and TV world, usually as a sort of guest commentator and so on. I work on a weekly show during the year where we talk about technology. And so with the conference, we're going to sort of address that audience as well as those that are like us and maybe day-to-day sit outside of the mainstream media. We'll talk to that audience too, bloggers that are wanting to get into podcasting. There seems to be a lot of that. And those within businesses and organizations that are wondering, well, how can we use podcasting maybe to share our message and to get maybe a bit of a deeper connection than what they get off a tweet or a blog post, because there's that connection that comes through listening to somebody week in and week out in a sort of a depth of learning that comes through.
You kind of build that relationship, don't you? I mean, you build a relationship with the person that you're listening to. Whether you've met them or whether you don't meet them, you're still building that relationship. Natalie, look, really, really interesting, because when you were talking, you said that you do a 1 in 5. So just tell us a little bit about that. You briefly explained that you went, like your first one, you might talk, but tell us your 1 in 5 formula.
Well, I guess the idea is to share. It depends coming back again to your goal of your podcast and what you love talking about, but I love shining the light on other women. Sometimes I would interview men, that's true, and sharing their story and letting some of their golden nuggets be the listeners really take on board some of what worked for them, what didn't work for them, listening to their challenges and their joys and applying that learning to their own business. And so while I've got tons to offer, I thought, you know what, it makes sense for me to interview other people as well. So I always did that right from the start. And of course, when you're interviewing people, that just adds another level of organization in terms of, do you sign up for Calendly or schedule once, or do you just do emails back and forth? Do you decide your topic? Some people will podcast, they'll flick people a set of 10 questions and they'll ask the same questions regardless of their guest. Other people, like I have a page on my website, right, where people can go and it's like, oh, yay, you've been asked to be a guest. Here are some things you should know. Here's a link to a previous podcast you can listen to before you come on air. When you come on air, make sure you have a glass of water and a notepad and a pen handy. It would be great if you could wear earbuds. Like, it just kind of briefs them. I usually brief them as well in a message, but there's a few things you can do to have a formula or a format so that the person is A, prepared, B, they're going to look good, they're going to sound good, and then the result is so much better, because you'll meet personality types who they need to know what you're going to ask them. They want to practice ahead of time or whatever. And then you'll get other people who just rock up on the day. I used to have some people come and record in studio with me, and I love the vibe. And Paul, you can probably relate to this, of having a guest who is there in the room with me. So I'm talking to them, I'm looking them in the eye, I'm using my hand gestures, even though it's only audio only. There's that certain level of intimacy. So we have 2 microphones, right? And I'm looking at the screen and making sure my GarageBand is working, but I'm mainly looking at them. And I have my little spiel. I say to them, this is not live. It's just pre-recorded. Just treat it like you and I having a coffee, but if my child walks in or if you start having a coughing fit, I can definitely stop it and edit it. I say, I usually don't edit. I don't edit out the ums and ahs. That's just my personality type, because I'm not a perfectionist. Also, I don't want to spend tons of time doing it. But I feel like it's raw and it's real. And that's probably why I love Blab, because it's raw and real as well. But I want to make it, quite professional. And I have the intro and the outro and the music and all that stuff as well. So, I mean, podcasting is just so amazing for sharing knowledge. And I definitely have people messaging me consistently saying, I've been listening to your podcast for 2 years. I thought I'd get in touch and see how you can help my business. Or, I listened to your podcast on different personality types. This is one of my favorite episodes, the 4 different personality types: the otter, the beaver, the lion, and the retriever. Otter. I listened to your personality podcast, and it really helped me with my child, or it really helped me with my ideal client, because now I know how to speak to different people differently or whatever. And so I love when I get feedback like that. They're basically saying, thank you so much for all the knowledge that you've been giving me over the years. And I love that.
Fabulous. Nats, thank you so much for sharing that. Really appreciate it. It definitely gives the audience something to think about when they're, kind of putting their podcasts together. Paul,
hey, my husband's just joined. You can let him in at some point.
I've already said hello to him. I've greeted him. Hola. I think it's wonderful that he's here. So welcome, Matt. Hola, fellow Earthlings. Hi, Paco. Now, Paul, you were talking about, and this is the part that really fascinates me, is how do you actually get your followers? Like, how do you get people following you? Like, what is it that you kind of do? Because you sound like you've put your podcast out on quite a few platforms. Like, which are the best ones? How do you get people to follow you? How do you grow that audience?
I think it's really the same as most other things in an online context. You just have to work away at building up an audience, whether it's a mailing list, whether it's social media followers through Twitter and Facebook and LinkedIn and the like. all of those channels will help you. And you can move that into an offline context too. I remember just after we had launched, I was thinking around, well, how do we get listeners to our new podcast? No one's going to know that we're out there just yet. And of course, doing well on iTunes, that helped because then more people would find it. But there was a launch for a new iPhone, I think it was, or an Apple product, just after we had launched, and there was this huge queue, maybe 100 or more people that were standing outside the local retailer, and me having been involved in a social network that was focused on music and the music world, and been involved in putting on music gigs, of course. In that world, you'd hand out flyers to people that were within your target market, or you get flyers into their hands. So in that case, what I did was I ducked into a nearby internet cafe. I printed out just a few details about the podcast and where to find it. A very small strip of paper. So I had one sheet that I cut up into maybe 30 or 40 strips of paper, and I just went down the queue. And out of those 100 people, I don't know how many listened in, but that was one of the sort of the offline ways in which we built our audience. And of course, I knew they were all target market because they were iPhone fans. iPhone being probably the easiest platform to listen to a podcast on. The fact they had an iPhone, they must have been into tech. So yeah, that was one of the mechanisms. But I already had a following as a blogger, and through social channels. So I just used all of those things, and you spread the word amongst your friends. And if you can get into the charts on iTunes, that certainly helps. And really it just grows from there. So it's not too dissimilar to growing a following for a blog or anything else. Of course, thinking around getting found in search engines and all those other same sorts of techniques and considerations apply. And of course, ultimately, you create great content. If the content you create is awesome and is relevant to your audience, then over time they're going to tell other people and are going to share about it. So our focus was on two niches. One was local to New Zealand, and the other was technology. So we talked about things from that local perspective. We engaged with the local providers, the telcos, and companies involved in rolling out faster internet. The companies that were bringing in the products into New Zealand, the Samsungs and Apples and Microsofts, and all of those things together helped us to create ultimately some good content, and of course getting good guests on the show as well.
That made a difference. So
there's a bit more than the one easy answer. And of course we say to people, hey, the network effect, join our network, and that will help, because we're already talking to the podcasters, or a lot of the podcast listeners that are out there locally.
So it sounds to me like when you went into your podcasting, you knew what you were going to be podcasting about. You had your niche that you were podcasting, both of you. And even though you've kind of moved a little bit, Nats, as you've gone along, and so have you, Paul, it sounds like both of you have kind of started at one point and then moved and changed, flexibility. And as your business has grown and changed, you've changed that podcast as well. It sounds like you're telling the audience that having really good content is absolutely critical, and making sure that you're planning that content out really well is important. So I'm hearing you and Natalie both saying things, for example, like you knowing who your guests are well in advance. You're scouring, and I assume you're doing this, Paul, is scouring the internet, looking for information, looking at what the new things are that are coming up, the technologies, connecting with the right people, and getting the right people into your podcast so that you can create that really great content as you go along. Let's just stick with content for the moment, because content is obviously very important throughout any social media channel. Content is the number one thing. If you don't have good content, well, you're going to lose people anyway. How are you creating your content? So how do you have like a set formula to create your content? I'm just talking about in terms of who am I going to get onto my podcast? Do you plan out? How do you do that? I'd love to hear from both of you.
I think ideally, if someone's doing a podcast, it's really great to know, coming back to your goal, if they are going to do some sort of upsell or encourage people to join a program or buy something from them. It's really good to know to link it in. So if you've got a specific, let's say you've got a 6-week course that you run, it's really good to obviously theme your podcasts in the lead up to that 6-month course so that you're sharing snippets of knowledge. You're dropping breadcrumbs. This is one of my phrases, dropping breadcrumbs throughout the podcast, not in a cheesy way, but just like giving them bits of knowledge and just making mention about your course. And sometimes definitely in the intro or outro, maybe doing more of a sales pitch about it. But I think if you can make it make sense so that your topics that you're talking about are aligned with the thing that you're going to offer them, just like you would in a webinar, right? The content you're giving is aligned with what your upsell is going to be, something like that. Just so I don't forget, Juanita, I wanted to jump in and just say 2 things that I wish I had done differently in my whole podcasting journey. Can I just say them now so I don't forget? Because it's hard to write notes when I'm holding my phone.
It's okay.
Number 1 would be to have a opt-in. Like at the point when Jackie and I first started, we never had a lead magnet or an opt-in. So we were giving out great content week after week and they were loving it, but we were never sending them anywhere other than the website for the show notes. So we had the website and the show notes, but even there, we kind of had a really small thing that said sign up for our newsletter, but we didn't have any sort of compelling opt-in, like sign up for our 10 top tips on how to be a happy mom or something like that, which would have been great, right? Then they give us their name and email, and then we can nurture them and eventually sell them our book. So I think tip number 1 would be to have some sort of really easy opt-in that you can send people. A lot of podcasters nowadays, Amy Porterfield, for example, she, every single podcast, she will send them to a different free gift, which is basically an opt-in. And she's got a great team who can put that together for her. Now, us who are just one-man bands don't need to be creating a new opt-in for every single podcast. It's a lot of work. But if you can have a kind of generic opt-in that is relevant to your ideal client and relates to some of your upsells, then that's definitely something I would recommend doing so that you could capture those people, because otherwise, if they don't sign up, you can't really communicate with them. The other thing I would have done differently, and this is what one of John Loomer's tips, he's a Facebook ads expert, is to just do, like, every time I do a podcast, then I go and I put it out on, Pinterest, and I put it out on LinkedIn, not always, and I put it out on Facebook a couple of times, and Twitter, but usually I put it out once or twice, and maybe I'd tweet once or twice. What I see a lot of people doing really well is they'll schedule 40 tweets, right, over like a 2-week period about that one particular podcast, and maybe they'll do 5 Facebook posts about it at different times scheduled, but they'll also do like a $5 a day for like maybe 2 days. And I never would boost a post about a podcast. I don't know why, I just didn't really do it. And so those are 2 ways that you can really make sure you capture your people and you grow your following by investing a bit of money. It'll come back to you in the promotion of the podcast episode. I hope that helps.
Those 2 are absolutely magnificent tips, Natalie, and I think that goes for anything that you're doing in terms of social, is really trying to capture your audience and how do you nurture them going forward. Yeah. It's absolutely critical. Thank you so much for those. They're brilliant tips. Brilliant. Paul, tell us 1 or 2 of your good tips, and what did you struggle with, and what was it that kind of, what have you learned? 2 great tips.
Yeah, I think planning ahead is important. For me, putting the podcast, the tech podcast together, for instance, was quite easy because it's an area that I'm interested in. I'm always reading about it, so I'm always capturing news stories that are relevant to me. So one of the first things I did was just created a document online that I could share with my other guests on the things that we wanted to talk about for that episode, so we could share those in advance. And then set that up in a way that everyone can collaborate. So if others have other ideas that they want to contribute, then we build that together. That document also has in it the things that are going to make sure that we sort of keep on track with some of our ways of doing podcasting. So, comments around the sort of language to use. Avoid using acronyms that are going to leave people behind because they don't understand some geeky acronym that might, maybe it's known by half the audience, but you don't want to leave the other half of the audience behind. Keeping the language clean so that we don't get our content sort of, blocked by certain audiences and certain, groups. and other guidance there that we've included as part of that document. So that goes out to everyone who comes on the show as a guest. That's been really helpful for us from a planning perspective. It makes it easy for me because I can just add to that document as I go. Anytime, anywhere, I can jump on my phone, something that I've read, and just pop that into the agenda without having to have a set time when I have to do all that planning. It just happens quite naturally as I'm consuming content online. So that's something that's really helped me.
Paul, just you've got a question here from Paco Dominicus. He says the document, is it like an operational plan, a strategy, something like a PERT plan? Now he's used an acronym there, so evaluation and review technique plan. Is it nice? Is it that kind of a?
It's a very simple document, sort of a one-pager. Basically, it includes the title for the episode, the date, who the guests are going to be, then some instructions at the top of the document, 3 or 4 sort of key instructions. Then there's an area where guests can add in their comments in relation to topics and what will be discussed. And then below that really is just bullet points of the topics to discuss. And each of those has a web link back to them. And, I guess, I adjusted this a little bit after doing some podcasting on one of the big US podcast networks there, the Twit network. I was involved with a number of their podcasts over a period of time. And, their format was a very structured spreadsheet that they would do, Google Docs. And, that was very, very helpful. Just in terms of seeing how they did it and how they all collaborated. So I adjusted my technique based on their learning, and I think the more that you can learn from others' techniques, the better.
Absolutely. They always say model other people. Model. Just quickly for both of you, and this is. Before I go any further, just for the audience, I'm not sure if you're aware, but if you do want to ask a question on Blab, if you look at the left-hand side of the screen, there is a questions area, and it's absolutely fabulous because if you ask your question in that area, we can pop it onto the screen, and that then helps anybody that is on the actual Blab to see the question, so it doesn't get lost in the actual messaging. First thing. And the second thing is you can give props to these wonderful people that are on the screen over here by hitting the hand signal on the screen like they're doing at the moment and popping in. And just if you hear something that you really like, hit the props, and it's fabulous for everybody. So there we go. All right.
Here we go.
So Paul, hit the props.
Other side.
No.
It's opposite.
Oh, did it? Oh,
yeah, it is opposite. So I've got to go like that. And I've got to go like that, and hopefully I've got it right. And if I go like that, I'm not pulling.
Juanita, I just had one more because I didn't really answer your content question. I was talking about theming with your upsell. But one woman who does such a great job, Natalie from the Biz Chicks podcast. Now she does a great job because she kind of does themes. So I think she has seasons almost, and so at one point she was doing one all about masterminding and the benefits of mastermind groups. And I think I was interviewed on her podcast. Was it episode 199 or episode 200? I think it was. We talked about networking, but one of the other things we talked about. So she's really great the way she kind of does clusters. So people might choose to do a certain theme relating to whatever their topic is, and then do 3 or 4 podcasts all around that particular theme, and then move on to the next theme. Now, I didn't do that. I did the more sporadic approach, but I could have done, like Facebook, and I do, 2 or 3 or 4 all around Facebook advertising, etc. And then I'd move on to something else, right? To lead magnets, and I talk about MailChimp, and I talk about the lead pages or whatever. But so that's just the idea of having clusters or themes.
Brilliant. I love that because even in terms of social media, when we help clients, we do them through themes and clusters and things like that. This morning, we just worked with a beautician, for example. And I know this has got nothing to do with podcasting, but it just shows how you can take anything that you do and work it through all your social media. So we're looking themes in terms of hers. The themes are, guys, I know you're not interested in this, but waxing. By the way, some guys do get waxing, so like waxing, facials, and they work through different kinds of themes. So yeah, I completely agree with you, Natalie. I think if you can keep those themes, there's so much information out there, and you can really work around them, However, I think, especially from Paul's perspective, when you talk about your technology, even though in advance there's something that might hit you now that that you wouldn't have known about, and you kind of got to jump on it now. You can't theme it out in 2 or 3 months' time. You have to do it now. So time is everything, isn't it? So there's some things that you theme, and there's some things that are just so like hot topic right now that you have to kind of do those now. So it's kind of keeping a balance,
especially in the technology space. It moves very quickly. So just even as we get our guests in here, and part of the reason I do podcasting is I just enjoy the social interactions. Right, it's fun, like this, hanging out with people, and by doing them in person, that makes it. I guess an even more social experience, but it does limit in terms of who can be there. So we do, 98% of our podcasts so far have been in person because of that aspect. But when we do that, so we take, for the tech podcast, we have a 2-hour window where guests come in here. Sometimes it's a little bit longer. And so we hang out and chat. We will chat through. We'll have a look and see, has there been anything new that's on Twitter or that we've just seen online that's a new topic that we should be discussing. So we can bring those things in right at the last minute, or sometimes even during the podcast we can add a topic. So you have to be prepared for those sorts of things to happen with technology. And with the business one, that's not quite so pressured, and so but we still have enough time there to chat through a little bit about what we're aiming to cover in the podcast. So we're on the same page and go for it. But again, we generally do those in person, and so for me, that the podcast creates an opportunity to meet with business people that maybe have inspired me or who I'd like to be inspired by. And that's one of the great things about podcasting is you build up that audience. It opens all sorts of doors. So for me, that's led to a weekly show on radio during the year, talking about technology on a nationwide radio station. Lots of opportunities, dozens and dozens of opportunities on television, and then guesting on other podcasts and so on. So there are all sorts of opportunities, and then of course meeting all those guests that you get to meet, and other people that are within the space, such as both of you, Juanita and Natalie. This has come about because I started podcasting. I wouldn't have met either of you probably otherwise. So it's fantastic. There are lots of great results, and particularly in terms of the fantastic people that you meet.
So can I jump in? Let's do a little quick promo for your event coming up, Paul, because in terms of meeting amazing people, you decided to put together this podcasting conference, which I know started out as something small and now has grown into a huge, big 2-day conference. And people can come to one day or both days. But I wanted to encourage those people that are here live with us right now, and also people watching the replay, if you can, get yourself to Auckland in February, and Paul can tell you the details in the link. It would be great to meet you in person. I'm going to be speaking. Juanita's going to be there. There's going to be tons of amazing people. Whether you're thinking of starting a podcast yourself, or whether you see the benefits of being on a podcast as a guest and you want to rub shoulders or maybe figure out how to become a guest on a podcast, and if you do, how to do it well, how to do justice to your brand and your business, then definitely get yourself to that event.
Thanks, Natalie. And you know what, just to clarify, and Paul, I did want to check this with you. You spoke about, because you've been speaking right through everything about these wonderful resources that you have. So you've got these lists and things like that. Are you going to be giving those out at the podcasting conference? Have you thought about that, or are you... So
yeah,
that,
I mean,
that
certainly, across myself and the other speakers, I think there'll be a lot of those practical things that we'll be sharing and making available in varying forms to attendees. I guess it will depend on what individuals are looking for. This is going to be quite an intimate event, so really, anyone that's after resources or has got particular questions or wants to hang out with any of the speakers, that sort of opportunity will exist. And then on the Friday night, for those who want to, we've got a sort of a VIP and conference sort of speaker event, so people can get more time socially as well with those that are speaking. So I think there'll be plenty of opportunity for people to get access to any particular resources that they're looking for. That's certainly something I'm working through at the moment. Is what can I collate to make available. And I know, Cliff, for instance, he has a huge amount of online resources available to people too. So, I think people that walk away after the conference will really have absolutely everything that they need to get started with podcasting, and not just get started, but to be very successful in podcasting. Cliff, for instance, has been behind and coached quite a large percentage of the top podcasters, particularly business podcasters in the US. I saw something online a while ago stating that out of the top 100 business podcasts that were on iTunes, that Cliff was involved in coaching and supporting about half of the podcast hosts that were actually involved in those top 100 podcasts. So, it's a pretty impressive CV that he's got there, and I think people are going to get a huge amount out of having Cliff attend in person, as well as getting that local input. So, anyone?
I know. When we did our podcast. Sorry, it's echoing back at me.
you sound fine on our side, so that's all good.
Okay. When we did our podcast, we really just found our way, and I feel like if only they told me, if we had the opportunity to go to a podcast conference in New Zealand where we were living, then that would have just changed the game hugely for us in terms of knowing what we were doing, what to do, what not to do, in order to really grow our audience and also to guest on other people's podcasts. I think that's really key, and tapping into other people who also have audiences just to help us along the way. So I think one of the things I'll be sharing definitely, and I can for sure put together some info for people to take away, is how to be a great guest on a podcast, like how to get booked. And when you do get booked, how to do a great job and do justice to your business and the podcast as well. So for me, it's like if I could have gone to that conference 3 years ago, people can get there, don't miss it. Yeah.
You know what, Natalie, and I do want to just give props to you and big kudos, because I tell you what, Natalie is one of the most professional people that I've ever met to work with. So Natalie has spoken at my social media conference that I put on every year, and she was a speaker last year, this year. But the professionalism is so important.
I'm so professional with my scarf right now.
There's a lot of crackling there, Natalie.
Guesting on somebody else's podcast and things like that. It isn't a good idea to be. You've got to think about the podcast. You've got to think about the audience that you're going to be projecting to. Yes, you might be on a video podcast that may only be audio, and that's what you kind of have to think about. But even as an audio, there's so many things that you've got to think about. Like, is the audience quite a prudish audience? So you wouldn't necessarily swear on that podcast. That type of video. And as a guest, I think those are things that you need to check out. But obviously, as the host, there are things that you want to let your guests know beforehand, so that you're preparing them really, really well. Would you agree?
Yeah. Can you hear me now? Sorry, I was trying to get my scarf away from my microphone as you were talking about how professional it was. I was thinking that's right. There are some things you can do as a host to make sure that your guest is well prepared and has a great time. I've had a few examples when my guest, I've asked them a question and they just didn't know what to say. And so I kind of just really elegantly just kind of swoop in and not rescue them, but just ease through it or add a little comment, or maybe, you just, as a host, you get really good at making people feel comfortable and looking good. And so even if they're really scared and they don't know what to say, you can kind of just cruise them through it and guide the conversation differently. One of the other things I did in every podcast usually is I'd say to them before we recorded, at the end of the call, I usually will say to you, is there anything else you want to add before we wrap things up? And I said, that's not to put you on the spot, but it's really to give you an opportunity. If you have this amazing thing you want to say, and then I just shut us down and we're all done, you feel like you forgot to say it or you didn't get a chance to say it. So at the end of the podcast, I'll say, is there anything else you want to tell our listeners before we finish wrap things up? And I say, you can either say, nope, I think we've covered everything, or you can go into your other thing. And that really helps them because they feel like they're never going to be left like, oh, I wish I'd said this or I wish I'd said that. So that's just one of my little tips that I like to do at the end of most podcasts. I always went for about a 40-minute time frame, and I got really good at timing it. And a lot of podcasters will appreciate that sometimes you start a podcast and you're only 10 minutes in and you think, oh my God, and you're thinking on your feet a lot. You're thinking, oh, how can I stretch this out to half an hour or 40 minutes? But then before you know it, you've only got 3 minutes left and you wish you could have another 10 minutes with that person. So it is part of the joy for me. Consistency. I like to keep it to 40 minutes, approximately thereabouts. But definitely if you can make your guest feel comfortable and look good, then your podcast is going to be a lot better for it.
Fabulous. We've got Kevin joining us, and Kevin actually does a travel podcast around Scotland. So welcome, Kevin. Hi.
Hi, Kevin.
Hi. Hello there.
Hello. Welcome. Are you in Scotland at the moment, are you?
It's 1 a.m. in the morning. Yes.
You're so committed.
Sometimes we're that committed too, but I don't know if it's good for our health always, Kevin, that'd be really great. Do you mind sharing us a little bit about your podcast?
Well, I retired about 6 years ago, and I decided to do a podcast just on a hobby basis because I spend a lot of time travelling around Scotland in a motorhome. So I started the podcast, and it's the best thing I've ever done in social media terms because of the traction I get, the engagement I get from people is amazing. I've met so many people through the podcast who end up coming to Scotland on vacation, and I meet them on their holidays or interview them on the podcast. So it's worked really, really well.
Do you have a sponsor, Kevin?
No, I haven't really given it much thought, if I'm honest. I've been very cavalier about the podcast, but I think this winter I'm home for a few months and I'm giving a lot of thought to how I might do a little bit of monetization around the whole topic. So
I'm sure the tourism people will be interested.
Well, I do a fair bit of Skype guiding almost with Americans in particular, where they get in touch and then I speak to them on Skype before and during their vacation. And I'm thinking, when I've spoken to them afterwards, that it's a service that people would seriously consider paying for, So what starts out as very, friendship ends up with me picking people up at the airport and doing all sorts of things. After they've gone home, I think, wait a minute, that didn't quite work out, So I have thought about monetization and or starting a podcast on something totally different. It's a little bit addictive, podcasting. This podcast, I was on hiatus for about 10 months. When I came back, quite a bit of my audience were still there, which was really good. When you're talking about consistency earlier on, I could certainly confirm if you're consistent, you'll get the benefit in terms of your numbers.
Yeah. And Kevin, if you talk about consistency, what for you is consistent?
I don't...
what do you define as consistency?
I was telling somebody the other day that I do a weekly podcast every 6 weeks. I love that. If I could stick to the same schedule, my problem is I like to, we were talking about the passion earlier. If I'm out in my van in a nice location, I can't wait to tell people on the microphone. If I'm here at what I call bricks and mortar, people know that I'm probably climbing the walls. I've got cabin fever, and I'm less likely to be producing a weekly episode. So if I could stick to a weekly schedule, I would get a lot of benefit from.
And then do you add photos to your show notes so people can see the locations?
I have a Facebook group where the group all share their photographs and their content, and I put some photographs on my website, and I've got a YouTube channel. But again, I do very brief show notes. There's loads of areas that I know I could put more into the podcast and reap the rewards. I just need to maybe give it the priority this year when I go back out. I probably spend about 8 months in the van every year, which is really where I want to be. I've even thought about going full time, and in my bio here, I talk about being a digital nomad because I do websites and people's audio and things from the van, and I've got a little studio in the van as well.
Oh, awesome!
My thought is,
I was going to ask you actually doing this all from the van?
I prefer to do it from home just now, and some of the gear I've lifted from the van to bring it home. So, but I'd love to do it from the van all the time. So the episodes from the van are more authentic, I think. So I'd like to do it from the time. But I get really excited talking to the podcasters, and then I'm one for prevaricating about the episodes.
Wow. It sounds really, really exciting. It actually sounds like a podcast I'd love to do. We travel around the whole of New Zealand and just podcast about all the beautiful places.
Your audio's breaking up a little bit on my end. So.
Yeah. Sorry, Nat, you're saying this sounds okay for everyone?
It's really staticky for me, but it might be my setup.
Is everyone staticky to you?
Mainly Juanita.
Is it mainly me?
Natalie's is a bit.
Okay, so just so that you guys know, one of the things that happen on Blab, and I don't know if it's just beta testing, but every time a fourth person jumps onto any of my Blabs, it'll either throw me out or it'll throw my voice,
the audio,
the voice down.
Yeah.
So sorry about that.
Okay, no worries. Is my sound okay?
Yes.
Your sound is fine.
Okay.
Your sound is fine.
Kevin, I can definitely see people paying for your knowledge for sure around tourism.
Thank you. Yeah. Well, I've followed you, all of you followed me as well, so I'll maybe try and keep in touch. I'd love to come to that conference if it's on in a year's time.
Oh yeah.
It'll take me more than a few weeks to plan that one from the UK. So
We'll look forward to seeing you next time.
What are the dates, Paul?
So it's coming up February 12th to the 13th, and it's here in Auckland, New Zealand. Even if you can't make it this year, probably worth signing up so you keep in touch with our updates.
No, just come this year.
The website is AsiaPacificPodcastConference.com.
Okay.
And that's more than enough time for those flights, by the way.
If you are coming out, I'm obvious as the audio is falling out for all of us at the moment.
Okay. Well, it's been a lot of fun.
I'm obviously, is it falling out? Can you not hear us now?
It's quite rough hearing your voice, Juanita. I don't know if my voice is rough as well, Kevin.
No, you're okay, Paul. You're a little bit quiet, but I can hear my audio's cracking up too.
It's a bit staticky.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it's staticky at the moment. Sorry about that. I'm obvious. I apologize. This is a beta. And because there's just one more question. So I hope I'm not too static, and I hope you can hear me okay. But this question, and it was somebody that actually asked the question early on. It was about how do you compare, for example, a Blab as a podcast to a traditional podcast?
Well, for me, the most common and traditional podcast would be that audio, so very much focused on audio that people are listening to, through their smartphone or usually at a later date. Where as Blab has very much got that video component to it. And there's probably a lot more live audience involved with Blab. So with podcasts, we used to do a live feed as well. We don't do that anymore. With most of my podcasts, we tend to record them, and then people will listen to them the next morning or the morning after, depending on when they go online. So very much sort of like that radio broadcast, but on demand.
Oh, absolutely. And Natalie, do you want to
Yeah. Did you notice how the quality was so much better when I left? I think it's the fourth person. I don't know if it's me. I think it's the fourth person thing. Yeah, so I recently moved to using Zoom.us to record so that I could actually have some video to go with my podcast. So I've recorded, depending on who my guest was, I would record probably, if you look up my last 20 episodes, maybe a third of them. No, I'm not sure. A bunch of them were recorded on Zoom, which means you can see me and my guest's face. So it's kind of like Blab, but not. So it's not live stream, but it is video as well as audio. But now that I'm using Blab, and I've used Blab a few times to record podcasts, and it's so helpful because it emails you a separate audio file and a separate video file, which is so easy, and it's so easy to upload it to YouTube. So it's very user-friendly. And I love it because it's so quick. But then what I would do is get my other virtual assistant to watch it, and she would type up the show notes. I would go into the show notes and I would just tweak them and add some things, double check the images, and then we'd go live on social media and push it out on social media. So I think Blab is a lot easier. It's like click the button and you're all go, but you do get tech issues. Whereas normally when I sometimes would record on Skype and use call recorder, other times I would record using GarageBand, whether in studio with my guest sitting beside me or across from me, or yeah, so I use Skype when they're not with me, and I use GarageBand when they're with me or when I'm doing a monologue. But again, there's a lot of saving the files, saving it to Dropbox, uploading it, editing. You know, there's a lot of faff that goes with it.
Yeah, absolutely. You've got to put the time. You've got to put the time aside for it. The only difference, but I'd like to hear Kevin's viewpoint on this, the podcast versus Blab for you, Kevin.
So, yeah, okay, go ahead.
I'll say something very briefly, and I'll drop out and let you get better audio maybe for your last few minutes. But I think
you sound fine by yourself.
But Blab is very, very different for me from the audio. I love the audio in many ways because it works well for me and for my audience. But the opportunity to come onto a Blab, there's a different dynamic. It's much more intimate and immediate and live. And for me, it's a chance. I keep thinking about running a show on Blab, and it'd be a great chance for my audience to come in and see me, you know, connect with me at a more intimate level. But I was thinking maybe running it in tandem with the episodes, where I would bring in maybe a guest that had been on the podcast and have a Q&A on here, or just take soundings from people who listen to the podcast, gather a new audience, but run a topic every week or so on Blab, and take some of the audio out and drop it into my podcast episodes to promote the Blab, you know, cross-promote both the episode on Blab and the episode on the audio. But I've found it really amazing how quickly you engage with people and how well you can make relationships. And, you know, even from a business point of view, I've seen a lot of business relationships develop on Blab already, even though I'm more interested in the sort of hobby side. But if I jump off, maybe your audio will improve if you go back to 3. Yeah, it was lovely speaking to the 3 of you.
Thank you. And follow us. We'll follow you too, Kevin. I'm following you now.
Thanks. And good luck in your conference.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. Thank
See you there.
I tell you what, that's dedication, 1 a.m. in the morning. Thank you, Steph. I think Kevin's on and he'll see that. Thank you, Steph. Appreciate that. Is my audio any better?
No.
Man. Oh, shoot. So I tell you what, I'm gonna close this Blab, and I just want to say thank you to the two of you, Paul and Natalie. Thank you so much for being guests on my Blab. Really, really appreciate it. You guys are absolutely phenomenal. Both knowing you personally and having the time for the both of you on the Blab. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's been fun.
Now,
That's fine, Juanita. It's lovely to be here on the Blab with you.
just to clarify for everybody else that is on the Blab, please follow us on Twitter. And I follow back, so I have already followed all of you. Paul is giving me a special link, and it will only be for a certain period of time, which I will tweet out to all of you, so that you can get a special rate for the conference if you do decide to come. And I will get that out to you today, and I'll be tweeting it out a few times. So if you want to jump on and you want to get a special rate, please have a look at my Twitter account. I will tweet it out, and you will get it. And it is only for a period of time, so you've got to take advantage soon. Am I right?
Yep. Register quickly.
Am I right?
I'll just close off by saying a few of my favorite podcasts, if people are keen, the ones that I listen to when I do my weekly, bi-weekly podcast Power Walk. I love Jamie Tardy's Eventual Millionaire. I love Amy Porterfield's Marketing Made Easy podcast. And I love Pat Flynn's Smart Passive Income.
Beautiful. And Paul, what would you like to say before we close off?
Just thank everyone for being a part of this. It was a lot of fun. If you're still a little bit on the fence, then go along to the Asia Pacific Podcast Conference website. We've got write-ups there on our speakers, Cliff Ravenscraft, Caitlin Sawyer from ABC in Australia, Megan Whelan, who's Radio New Zealand. We've got Michelle Dickinson, also known as Nano Girl, who's a bit of a globe-trotting scientist who's launching a new podcast with us shortly. Natalie, Cutler, Welsh. We're looking forward to having you at the event. Will Fleming and some others whose details will be going up shortly. So, that's where to find out the details. Or feel free to tweet me directly, or you can find my contact details also through my website at paulspain.com if you have any direct questions.
Fabulous. Paul, thank you so much.
Having me.
Really, really appreciate it. And you've been an amazing guest. Thank you very much. And Natalie as well. Guys, thank you. And if you want to know about podcasting, you want to listen to this back, go back and you can listen to it. And join my next podcast, my podcast, which is my lab, next week at 1 o'clock. And I'll be talking to Jan Mayer. And it's going to be a really, really interesting podcast.
Great.
So thank you.
Thanks, guys.